a swift orderly change, 'cause behind its door there's nothing to keep my fingers warm, and all I find are souvenirs from better times before the gleam of your taillights fading leads to find yourself a better life. I was searching for some legal document as the rain beat down on the hood, when I stumbled upon pictures I tried to forget. And that's how this idea was drilled into my head. 'Cause it's too important to stay the way it's been. But there's no blame for how our love did slowly fade. And now that it's gone, it's like it wasn't there at all. And here I rest, where disappointment and regret collide, lying awake at night. And there's no blame for how our love did slowly fade. And now that it's gone, it's like it wasn't there at all. And here I rest, where disappointment and regret collide, lying awake at night, all night, when I'm lying awake at night.
Discussion over dinner.
This is our home. I came to listen to you, to talk with you, 'cause I don't wanna be a stranger, to find hope with you, to grow with you. And whether we are different or the same, I wanna know your name.
Discussion over dinner is sponsored and underwritten by State Street Community Church and the Pax Center.
Welcome, everyone. Whether you're streaming with us online or you're with us here in person, welcome. It's good to be together, isn't it? We've not been together for so long. It's so good to see you. Our discussion over dinners, if you've not been here before, these events, the purpose is to gather together with a diverse set of people. Obviously, State Street Community Church and the Pax Center sponsor this, but this isn't necessarily a religious thing. This is not a Pax Center thing. This is for us a community event to come together, to listen to our neighbors who have diverse sets of experience that can teach us things. And one of the best ways to do that, in my experience, is to do it over dinner, to actually break bread together. How was the food? Yeah, Joel Crane and Pastor Becky Crane, they were slaving over that food today. They were just so dedicated to doing that. and I didn't help, so good for them. But good to have you here today. We've got a great discussion we're going to have about the adoptee experience. Joining me at the table today are three different ladies who were all adopted and have differing and varied experiences with the adoption process. Some of you in this room have been adopted. Some of you are thinking about adoption. Some of us streaming this or listening to the podcast of this have had differing experiences with adoption. And one of the things that we wanted to do is firstly to let you know that we see you and that your experience is important to us, and that we, as those who have not been adopted, owe a debt to you to listen and learn about your experience so that we can grow and evolve as humans as well. So tonight we're going to talk about the adoptee experience, and we've got a fantastic panel assembled. Now, if you have a question, and you can text these in at home if you're streaming or online. Now, sometimes, like on Tuesday, I'll get a text about a question, and because they're listening to the podcast, they will not still be here on Tuesday. So you really need to do it live. But that number is 219-690-8057. That's 219-690-8057. And if you have a question for our panel, it's an anonymous thing. You're welcome to text it to me, and I would be happy to ask it for you. So let us tonight meet our panel. Our first guest is a longtime LaPorte County resident. Adoption has impacted her life in many ways. She was adopted as a child and also had a biological child adopted by their grandparents. She and her fiance have one child at home and two more adult stepchildren. In recent years, she has met and reconnected with her biological sister, which has given her an additional family. As a result, her personal adoption story is unique, and she looks forward to sharing her experience and insights during our conversation tonight. Please join me in welcoming Betsy Bell. Welcome, Betsy. Our next panelist is a partner at Newby Lewis, Kaminsky & Jones, where she specializes in family law, which allows her the opportunity to be involved in various types of adoption processes, including newborn adoptions, foster parent adoptions, step-parent adoptions, interstate adoptions, and finalization of international adoptions. Anything legally involving adoptions, I'm going to guess she's involved with. As an adopted child and an adopted mother, she knows that families come together in many ways and is always honored to be a part of a family's adoption journey. Please join me in welcoming Christina Jacobucci. Our final guest serves as the Executive Director for Indiana Land Protection Alliance. ILPA is a statewide consortium for organizations, agencies, and individuals advancing land and water conservation for the public's benefit. As people that love to garden and love our green spaces here in the city, this excites me. She has a JD from Chicago-Kent College of Law and a BA in Political Science and English from Temple University. She has been active with the land trust conservation community since 2017, following an initial career as a public interest attorney, including service as a public defender in Indianapolis, Marion County, and later as an assistant city attorney for the city of South Bend. She was born in South Korea and adopted by a white, blue-collar family in the United States when she was only 4 months old. Growing up in a small town in rural Pennsylvania with 4 older, non-adopted brothers has given her a unique perspective on people, communities, and those lived experiences that unite us. Please join me in welcoming Andrea Huntington. So panelists, I'm so glad you're here. And again, I want to assure you that there are no wrong answers when people have a question, or if I have a question. This is about your experiences. These are my favorite conversations because this is not a type of, when I have conversations on my radio show, it's always with politicians that try to make up, answers to things. This is not anything you have to make up answers to. You just have to share your experience. So, Christina, I'll start with you. And don't forget to speak into your microphones for our guests at home. Will you please share your personal adoption story?
Sure. First of all, let me just say thank you all for having me here tonight. It's really an honor to be here with you and to have an opportunity to talk with you. using a microphone. I don't usually need a microphone. That's not typically a problem, but we'll go from here. So I was adopted as a newborn. I was 10 days old when I was placed with my parents, and one of my favorite stories is that, so I was adopted through the Department of Child Services, and I have the impression that the adoption experience in 1979 was very different than the adoption experience that many people have now. In that, my parents knew that they were waiting for a baby, but they didn't really have any indication of when I would come. And so I was born early, and so I spent a couple of days, not long, but a couple of days in the hospital, and apparently they called my mom the day before I was coming to their home, and she was at her place of employment, and she started screaming and jumping up and down, "I just had a baby, I just had a baby." And although everyone, the patients in the office where she was working, I think were probably confused, the people with whom she worked knew exactly what she meant. And so I was at their home less than 24 hours later. So they had been on a wait list. They didn't know when I would be placed. And they tell a story of how I apparently arrived at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I have no independent recollection. But they have a really lovely story about how on the morning of my arrival, all of their friends gathered in their home and brought, hand-me-down cribs and bassinets and blankets and clothes and all kinds of things that a baby needed. Because like some adoptive families, my parents made a decision not to ready the home for a baby because for them, having constant reminders of a baby with the uncertainty of knowing if one was ever coming was too difficult to live with on a day-by-day basis. So obviously when they got the call less than 24 hours before a delivery, they needed to kind of pool resources. But it really did start my life in a way where I was invited into a community of people who continued to support me through the rest of my life, candidly. And so I was an only child, only child for my parents. And so certainly that experience being adopted shaped my personal and professional journeys. I really grew up. I mean, I'm sure many of you in this room remember the baby Jessica case and remember all of those really difficult cases that were happening in the 90s. And so I was really coming to age and kind of coming into my own during that time. That really shaped me. I began speaking publicly about those things, went to college, went to law school, decided that I wanted to specialize in adoption law. And I also wanted to continue to live in my community where I was born and raised. And so that led me to practicing family law with a specialty focusing on adoption law. And then also led me to my own adoption journey. And so my husband, Matt, who's here with me tonight, and I adopted our son, Emmett, in 2015. And we adopted Emmett through the National Down Syndrome Adoption Network. And so that has been a major blessing in our life. And so adoption has shaped me personally from the minute that I came to my parents' home on a daily basis when I'm privileged to work with the families that allow me to be part of their journey, and as I continue to parent all of my sons, but Emmett, who came to us in a slightly different way. So I guess in a nutshell, that's my story.
Remind me again, how many children do you have?
3.
3, okay.
So we have a 13-year-old, Evan, and then our 6-year-old, Emmett, and then our 4-year-old, Elliot.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. Andrea, what about your story? Can you share a little bit about your personal adoption story?
Sure. So, is this close enough?
Yeah, you're fine, you're fine.
Okay. So I was about 4 months old. My parents went through an adoption agency. So my parents had 4 boys before they adopted me, and then they had a daughter who passed away in the hospital very young, just a few weeks old. And so then my parents went into, they had foster children over the course of about probably 8 years. And then a lot of, I think, heartache through those 8 years, and then decided that they wanted to adopt. And so they went through an international adoption agency. I'm told that I came over with 19 other babies and just one male caretaker caring for all of the babies on that flight from South Korea.
Oh, wow.
So I think he was probably changing a lot of diapers.
I think that's all he was probably doing, honestly.
And I mean, I don't know too much. I have lots of interesting paperwork, and my parents. So I think my understanding is I lived with a foster parent in Korea, so I was never in an orphanage, and they sent me to my family with. It's called a hanbok, but like a traditional Korean dress. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. But anyways, my parents didn't do a lot of videotaping, but the one video that they have, a friend came over and filmed like my homecoming. And so you can see my dad opening it up, trying to figure out what exactly this dress was. But yeah, so came over with lots of other babies, and my biggest support system is what was really nice. The adoption agency actually connected all of the families. So I grew up knowing a lot of other adopted children, and we had play dates, and so that was, that was really, really beneficial.
That's very cool. All right, Betsy, share a little bit about your story.
Well, my parents, I was adopted at 5 days old. They brought me home from, I was born in Gary, and they had previously been pregnant and unfortunately lost the pregnancy. So, but they knew that they wanted to have a child. So I went to a Christian church in Illinois, and or I grew up in that same church. The pastor knew of a lady from another church who was pregnant and did desire to keep who was me. So through the church, I don't know how it worked or whatever, but lawyers obviously, but because of the pastor and his wife, my parents were able to find me. So I grew up in the church. I was named after my pastor's wife, my middle name, Catherine. And I grew up in Illinois with them, and I did not know a whole lot of other adopted children. I had a wonderful childhood that I can remember. I think that's one thing that bothers me a little, is that I just don't know a lot. Like, I don't remember a whole lot about my childhood, which is really weird. I remember little key moments and stuff, but eventually, as of now, both of my parents are deceased. Up until people would always ask me, well, do you want to know who your mom is, or do you want to know who, if you have more family? And I always said, oh, I don't know. Maybe if I looked like around the corner, and I'd be like, oh, that's my mom. Oh, okay. Well, come to find out, I look at my phone during Halloween trick-or-treating, and there's a message from a Bobby Schroeder, which was my pastor's daughter-in-law, I guess. And she says, so I've been in contact with a girl who says that she's looking for her sister, and she trickled down to find Bobby. And she had a dream, and she wants to meet her sister, and this is all the information she was given, a time, a date, the people. And I took a whole weekend to think about it, and Facebook stalked her and everything, and the whole family, I guess. And so now eventually I've met my whole biological family. I now have two brothers and a sister, and my mom and uncles that I never knew about, and everything, and I've known them for 2 years now. So, and my mother contacts me multiple times throughout the day to say hi or ask how my day's going. And I think that is very odd for me, because the way I grew up, I think was a little bit different. I don't know about their situations, but I never really felt super close to my adopted family. I knew we loved each other, and I loved them, and they loved me. But there was just something like I wasn't, I don't know how to explain it. So after a while, when I grew up, me and my mom, after my dad passed away, my adoptive dad passed away, I guess it was just me and my mom, and after a while, we sort of drifted apart and didn't really speak or hold a whole lot of contact or communication. And um, thankfully, through health problems, I was able to move her back to LaPorte, and spend some time with her. And she had cirrhosis of the liver, so I was able to spend a couple months with her and reconnect and spend time as a family, and her to get to know Caleb. And then she eventually passed away as well. So it's come around like full circle, where I didn't really have families, but now I actually have a whole family now that I never knew about.
Thank you. Christina, have you reconnected to your biological family at all?
I haven't, and I just think it's really personal to everyone's journey and everyone's experience. I certainly hear what Betsy is saying about not feeling necessarily always as connected growing up. I felt very connected and very bonded in my family group. Didn't always look the same, but didn't matter. And I always felt very supported and very connected. And I don't know if that would have made a difference on my desire to search for a biological parent or not. I've just never really felt a deep-seated desire to do that. I've always felt very fulfilled and complete in terms of what I have. To the extent that I've ever thought that I wanted more information, it may have been purely for practical reasons. So medical, because obviously having some biological children of my own, understanding what some of those predispositions would have been nice. All I know is that my birth mother was 16 years old. That is it. It is the single solitary fact that I know. And so having some health information would be nice, I think, but I've really never had any desire. And I remember, because I also grew up with some kiddos, some people who were adopted, and it was very important to them. They had a very deep-seated desire to do that. And I would think, well, maybe when I get married, I'll want to do that, because I'll have this feeling of connection and wanting to pass something on. And then that didn't happen. And then I thought, well, maybe when I have my kids, I'll want to do that. And then that never happened. And so it's certainly not that if the opportunity presented itself that I wouldn't be open to it. It's just nothing that I can ever imagine myself seeking. And I'm very content with the arrangement that I have now, and so I have never sought, I've never looked, wouldn't even know where to start.
Explain to me, because you work obviously in adoption law, so maybe some of our people here or watching might not know the difference between an open adoption and a closed adoption. Can you explain that, just so, because again, the diversity of experience for adopted children can be very, very different, right?
Sure. So open adoptions can mean a lot of things. I mean, on the most liberal or open end of the spectrum, there is, from the time that a child is born, an understanding that biological parents are going to play a role in that child's life in a significant way, usually through in-person contact, and that may be as infrequently as once a year at holidays or birthdays. It may be as frequently as once every other weekend, and the biological parents are really part of the family network and fabric in a very present physical way on a regular basis. I think that there are sort of semi-open adoptions, which I think a lot of people choose to do, where there may be written updates, letters, photographs.
More from the parents' angle, kind of? Or?
Correct, and typically it's one time a year, or maybe 2 times a year, depending on the age of a child. And then a strictly closed adoption is not only is there literally no information exchanged, but at the time of birth, even, you don't know names. You may get a medical questionnaire if birth parents are willing to provide that information, but beyond that, there's no contact, and it is closed, and there's no expectation of continued information or visits or in-person contact.
Do you see that more now in adoptions? Do you see more medical release stuff happening? As you said, it would have been nice probably, knowing because that's such a huge part of heart disease, these kind of things, what you're dealing with, in your DNA.
I've never had a birth parent refuse to provide that information. They usually give it very, very openly. They don't put their names on it, and they don't say, it was my grandpa Jim. I mean, but they say, how many people removed it happened to and what the genetic predispositions are. I've never had anyone say no to that. I certainly would say that, if you were looking at adoption practices as a trend, so I was adopted in 1979, and when that when that happened, I think traditionally almost all adoptions were closed. Everything was sort of sealed up, and as things have progressed, the pendulum has swung very strongly in a different direction, so that we see a lot of expectation, either from agencies or people involved in the process, that there is going to be some degree of openness. And that's a really important decision that people have to make as they're going through their own adoption journeys. Because what I heard from all three of our stories is that we had biological parents, we had adoptive parents, regardless of whether they had biological children or not, who had a very deep internal desire to be a parent again, or for the first time, or whatever the case may be. And striking a balance between that desire and also setting expectations and boundaries for a relationship moving forward for potentially the next 18 years can be a challenging balance to strike.
Now, Andrea, you are obviously, you had a transnational adoption and a transracial adoption. Do you know anything about your biological family at all?
So I do, I guess, technically have names, but I think my experience has been a lot like Christina's, where it's, I've just never had a desire. I know the agency that my parents used, they did help some children who were interested. So I did grow up knowing children who went back and met sisters and biological parents even. I just never had a desire to. Also, as I get older, the medical questions, really that's the only reason I've ever thought about it. But even though my parents are in Pennsylvania, and sometimes it feels like we're living in different worlds where we are really close, and I think only very recently it's been that I don't talk to them every day, and that's just out of time. But I talk to my parents almost definitely every week and several times every week. So yeah, it's
Were all three of you the only adopted child in your family? And did all three of you also have other siblings? No? Did you? Okay. So you did, okay. And one of the questions we have received is, was there any tension there being the only adopted child, having, did you say 3 or 4 adopted brothers, maybe? Biological brothers, yeah.
Yep. So, my parents had 4 boys. So the closest in age is 10 years older than I am, and then they go up. So they're older. I think being the youngest and being the only girl, I don't know. I think I was kind of a novelty for my brothers. So, and this is gonna sound terrible, but it's definitely endearing. I think one of my brothers took me in for like a show and tell day at school, and then there was a Christmas. I don't know if you remember, but like packages used to come with all those little stickers, like made in China and made in Taiwan, and so there was a Christmas, I think, that my brother stuck those all over me. I think if anything, I really think it's just being the youngest. Lots of older children, I think, or the oldest children always think that the youngest are getting special attention and that they're the favorites. So I think maybe there's a little bit of that as I got older, but I think that that's just something that happens in a lot of families where there's multiple children. So I don't.
One of the questions we received, I'll give this to you, Betsy. How has being adopted impacted how you parent today?
I am down. I don't know. I'm not a helicopter.
Your son is right here, too, right? Yeah.
You can bring him up and ask. Me and Caleb are very close to each other, and I would not have that any other way. And that probably has impacted a little bit just because of the relationship I had with my adoptive parents that I really want to give all I can to him and provide, not gonna make me cry, but really be the best I can be for him, just how my parents wanted to be for me, you know? And after 10 years before my other son, I wouldn't change him for the world.
Aw. Hey, you get to stay. Way to go, buddy. Yeah. Christina, you work with a lot of adopted families, and so I think you could speak to this as one of the questions we have here is, as people that want to be inclusive of people who are adopting and adopted, is there any kind of language that we need to make sure that we use to be more inclusive? You know, you guys might know this. Michelle Shirk, who is a part of our team here, we were debating for quite some time even what to call this, because we wanted to make sure that we were inclusive of everyone. So we ended up with the adoptee experience. But, you know, because we don't want to have triggering language, we don't want to do anything. So is there anything that people maybe need to either stop saying or start saying to help include and embrace adoptees and adopted families?
That's a really interesting question, and as a lawyer, obviously, we spend our whole lives trying to make sure that we're picking the right words and using the right words, and so we've adopted a kiddo with special needs, and very early on in our journey through that process, it was, you know, we are adopting a child with special needs, not a special needs child, he's not a Down syndrome child, we're adopting a child with Down syndrome, and that really was powerful because it's not really just about the words, it's a complete concept. We're adopting a human being who also happens to have Down syndrome, as opposed to it being a qualifying characteristic. When it comes to adoption, I certainly don't know that there are like hard and fast rules like that, like person first language, right? But I do know some things that have affected me and that always sort of make me uncomfortable personally, and I don't know that that has translated with my clients or not, but I really hate it when people talk about you know, their own child. Like, for example, if a family has both biological and adopted children, it's, well, they have their own children and then they adopted this child. That troubles me greatly because all of their children are their children collectively. When we hear language like, do you ever want to meet your real mom or your real dad? Well, I have a real mom and a real dad. And so, and again, everyone's experience and story and language is different. I was adopted as a newborn. I imagine if I was adopted as a 10-year-old, my perception of who my real mom was may be a little different. And so I don't like when we talk about real parents. I think it's appropriate to...
That word real just...
And in either direction, really. I mean, maybe the right language just is, you know, a biological parent or an adoptive parent, or, you know, or... I think that language is just more appropriate. So it always bothers me when people will say, you know, well, she couldn't have her own children, so she adopted that child, you know, because then you're creating a distinction, I think, that really isn't accurate for most people's realities. And so, yeah, I suppose that those are kind of trigger words for me. I'm sure everyone who has been adopted has their own sort of list of things, but those are the ones that kind of stand out in my mind.
Andrea, what were some things that your family did specifically that were helpful in the adoption process to feel included as a child of theirs, you know, so that you didn't get othered as kind of, you know, so many other people might even unintentionally do. But, you know, it sounds like you guys both, you know, all had parents that really embraced you, not as an othered child, but as their own children. And so what are some of the things that you think your parents did very well?
Well, I was just going to say, I agree with the whole real thing because I have been asked that a lot, but you know, in terms of what my parents did so that I never felt like that, they never, you know, made any distinction between my brothers and I in any way, in terms of our relationship with them. You know, I think very early on they made it seem like it was a very special thing. I don't know how to describe it, but you know, and my dad and I, for example, we would like joke that you know, that I fell out of the airplane, and my parents were really, really excited and lucky, and my dad was there to catch me, or, so, but they, and obviously I knew that wasn't true, but I don't know, they would do things, and we had books, and it wasn't like it was ever a thing, but I think they just, I don't know, they made it like very natural. There wasn't a moment like where we talked about it. It was just like I was theirs, and it was just, and it was just, they always made me feel like I was a blessing to their life instead of, I hear a lot of people, when I tell them I'm adopted, they say, oh, your parents must be really good people, or, oh, that's a very nice thing. And, no, my parents wanted me, and I always felt that way. And so I always think it's funny when people say that, because my parents are nice people, but, it's not, them adopting me did not, make them nice. So, but, and that's another thing that bothers me is people, when they think of adoption as a charity. But, I like to think that people who adopt, they do it because they're adding joy to their own lives.
That's beautiful. I like that they're adding joy. Do you like, and this was a question we have, do you like the language, or do you accept the language of your parents chose you? Is that acceptable to say you were chosen, or would you just prefer, because would you say your father said drop from the sky and caught you? I think is great. But.
Yeah, no, I definitely, one, I'm not very easily offended by things, so I would be perfectly fine with that language. And certainly if anybody saw the picture that my parents received of me, I think, I don't know that they would have chosen me because my understanding is that I had lice, and so to resolve that, they just shaved chunks of my hair out. So the picture that my parents received, like my hair was just, like I was
a little bit of a hot mess, huh?
Yes, I was missing spots, and then the little bits of hair I had were just sticking straight up in the air. So, so I don't know that they would have chosen me had they seen the picture beforehand. So.
Now, if you have a question for our panelists, we're going to play a really quick game, but you're welcome to text those questions. If you're streaming with us online, please feel free to also text the questions 219-690-8057. That's 219-690-8057. I'd be happy to give the question over to our panelists. And any questions, a fine question. I was really happy before we had this conversation when Andrea said, I'm not offended easily. I said, oh, great, we're going to be fine then. Because I need people around me that don't offend easily, because I'm a person that puts my foot in my mouth more than anything. But so we're going to, as is our custom at our discussions over dinner, we're going to play a game. And we always have a game where we have a winner. Let me make sure I have my gift card here, because Pastor Becky stopped and got a Starbucks gift card for our winner. And thus, to this point, we've not had a loser in this game. Every candidate that has played it has won the game miraculously. And so I need a candidate to play this game. And if you don't volunteer, I will pick you. So does anybody want to play? All right. Let's go back here. You're in, huh? You're in. Hey, Joe. All right. Pastor Becky, I'm going to have you man the thing here. There's a question, Pastor Becky, and we're going to go, you can stand up. Go ahead and introduce yourself. What's your name?
Joe Katulski.
Joe Katulski. Hello, Joe. All right. We have questions here, and I need you to get the questions right. And if you get the questions right, this gift card to Starbucks is your gift card. If you don't get it right, you owe us money for your dinner.
Ooh, okay. All right.
So, all right. Question. Adoption has been an official legal process in the United States since when? I even gave you 4 options.
Guessing A.
Guess B. Guess B.
I'm guessing B.
B. What's the answer, Pastor Becky? B. Way to go. You got it right. Next question. All right. There are blank children adopted annually within the United States. Now, this is a general number, obviously, because each year is going to change a little bit, but these are the official statistics on how many children. This does not include transnational adoptions. This only includes adoptions here. How many are there?
I'm going between B or C. I'm thinking C.
Phone a friend. Phone a friend. Phone a friend and let your wife be your friend.
D.
D. He chose D. What's the answer? D. Way to go.
They're so great.
You are 2 for 2. To put this in perspective,
Game
this
show's not my thing.
this equates to 1 out of every 25 families with children having one that is adopted. This obviously doesn't include foreign adoption, which the U.S. Department of State reports being about 7,000 every year. All right, how many children are eligible for adoption in foster care currently? Again, that's a rough number. 17, 107, 10,700, or 107,000.
It's got to be D. Because a lot of kids are going to come from foster care.
Are you sure? D is your final answer? That is your final answer?
Yeah.
What's the answer? D, yes, correct. Way to go. As of right now, there are more than 107,000 children eligible and waiting for adoption in foster care. That does not mean that there are 107,000 people in foster care. The average age of a child waiting for adoption is 7, and 29% of all children will spend at least 3 years in the foster care system. All right, next one. Which of these famous singers was adopted? A, Faith Hill, B, Kristen Chenoweth, C, Sarah McLachlan, or D, Debbie Harry of what band? Blondie. There we go. I had to include one for Lou. All right, which one?
B.
Which of these famous singers was adopted, and what is your answer?
I'm going to go with B.
Actually, that answer is wrong. All of them were adopted. E.
Okay.
But you know what? I fooled you there, so you still get the gift card. Everyone give it up for Joe. We're going to get back to our panelists here. If you have any questions, again, our number is, put that number back up for me because I don't have it memorized, 219-690-8057. All right, we have a question here. We are in the process of adopting our foster daughter. Do you have any tips of things I could do to help her understand her biological family and still know that we love her as much as our biological children? I want her to know her story, yet not feel different than our biological children. And anybody can answer this if you'd like. Go ahead.
I mean, I think I would probably echo what Andrea had said, and that is just that for me, I was not raised in a home with any siblings, but what I can say is that it was just always part of my story, and it wasn't better than or worse than, it was just different then. And so I don't know that it needs to be quantified in terms of, that you're going to create a distinction or create an otherness or create, this is better than that. It's just part of a story. I do think that talking about it openly or using, books and talking about it as kind of just a normal daily dialogue, not sitting down and making it a big event. It's just part of our normal discussion about the way that we talk about how our family came together. And I think that just creates togetherness and normalcy. And even among biological kiddos, all of their stories are different and all of them have unique experiences. And so this is just part of your foster kiddo's story that's a little bit different than your other children's.
Betsy, did you grow up knowing you were adopted, or is that something you learned later?
It was always known.
Okay.
Always.
You always knew.
And I remember sitting, my teacher who used to watch me all the time, she was an upholsterer as well on the side. So I just remember.
Because that's what we create. Teachers have to find something else to do, correct? Yeah.
And so we were all just sitting down there, and that's when I remember the first time hearing the full story of how I came to be. Not that it was ever hidden or not free information. It was always talked about, not always, but always known to me and not hidden at all. But at that point, I finally got why I was adopted is because my mom at 21 became pregnant. She went out on a date with somebody and it went too far. So, and she knew at 21 she just was not ready. So that's, I remember sitting in the basement filled with yarn, fabric and uncovered couches and learning that story, learning that piece of my history.
That's interesting. Here's a question that you that we received. Did you ever feel like a second choice since they had a tragic event prior to adoption? I think, did you say your mother maybe miscarried? Did you ever feel like a second choice, or was that really never?
I don't think that ever really crossed my mind. Again, I don't know if it's just how my parents, I don't know. I never felt that way. And I think my parents really tried to make it seem like, even, I don't obviously know my story before my parents. But even then, my parents always made it seem like whoever my biological parents were, that they wanted me, that there was maybe just something in their lives why they couldn't keep me. And so if anything, they just always made me feel like multiple people wanted me.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Almost a little bit. Sorry, what you were saying, that your biological mother just wasn't ready, correct? Which is very different than saying I don't want you, right?
Oh, yeah.
So
Now she's over.
Oh, you're
Sorry.
fine. Yeah.
Now she's over she thought this would never happen to actually meet me one day. And, she's like, every year on your birthday, I would send up a thought or whatever about you and, hope that were you alive or everything was okay. So she's very happy to have that me in her life as well as me too.
Go ahead, Christina.
What I was going to say was that I was raised Catholic, went to Catholic school my whole life, and so I was around a lot of families where they had 9, 10 kids biologically, and they all came to school together. And I do recall growing up that, when you're kind of in that tough, like 5th, 6th, 7th grade, kids would say, you weren't even wanted. You weren't even wanted. And I remember coming home and saying to my parents, so-and-so said I wasn't even wanted. And my mom said, the next time they say that to you, you just tell them, their parents waited 9 months for them. And we waited 10 years for you. And so do the math, but in all seriousness, I think to the points that both of you had made, I've never felt a sense of not being wanted. My parents, I don't know that they chose me, they waited for me, and there was something special about that. And so I always felt very loved and very wanted and very close. And so, but it's not to suggest that there certainly weren't cultural questions about it growing up.
Did you have difficult years processing your adoption story as a child, as a teen, as an adult? Was there any point where you were more curious or not, or that maybe it kind of festered in you that you thought about wanting to know your parents? You had said, Christina, that really never really hit you, right? I mean, it never really set in for you. Did it for you? No. What about for you, Betsy? Did it for you?
It would only come up like when people would ask me, like, "Oh, do you ever want to meet your real mom?" That whole real thing again.
Yeah. Hey, stop saying that, everyone. All right.
So that would be really the only time that it would come up. So, and now, as I said before, and how they said the medical thing, going 37 years of my life. Writing NA on my medical history, and you never know. You might have a heart attack early. You might have lung cancer,
breast
run in
cancer,
your family,
all these things.
and you're like, well, I'm just winging it out here. So, so that's really the only time that it would come into my thought process is when people would ask. So.
All right, if you have any questions for our panelists, we've got some more coming in, but feel free to ask them. You can text them to 219-690-8057. Whether you're in the room or watching, streaming at home, you're welcome to text us. Again, that's 219-690-8057. Here's another question for you. Any of you can answer this. What words can you use to explain adoption to children in a way that they can understand? Yeah, go ahead.
I would think that, I mean, as all children, you're special and you're loved and you're cared about, but as an adopted child, you were like sought after. That wasn't just oh my gosh, I'm pregnant, like this is happening. No, like we wanted you, we craved you, we desired to share our love with another human being and raise them and to be, what do they say? Put in good, get good out, you know? So they wanted to have you in their home and teach you and love you and send you out in the world being a loving person and caring and with wonderful values, hopefully.
And it's good. It's a good correction, though, or a good point to note. Not everyone had even positive. The three of you had at least somewhat, if not tremendously, positive experiences with your adopted families. Not everyone has had those experiences, and it's good to note that as well, because there are people that get adopted into families that it doesn't work out as well as it has for you, and we certainly don't want to minimize that experience. Christina, this is for you. What are the differences, the differences between being adopted through foster care versus a private adoption agency?
Well, so in order to be adopted through foster care, kiddos have to go through a child in need of services process, which is usually a relatively lengthy process where...
That's CHINS, by the way. You'll hear that said a lot in the system.
Yep, CHINS, Children in Need of Services. And so in order for children to be eligible for adoption through that system, parental rights of biological parents have to be terminated. And that often happens after attempts at reunification are made and efforts to keep a family intact have been made. And so that's just a real investment of emotional time and resources. And a lot of times what we see are that foster parents are along for that journey and then ultimately adopt the children that were placed with them in foster care. So in many cases, when people are doing foster to adopt, they are fostering children through that whole CHINS process, really with the uncertainty of whether or not that is going to in fact become an adoption or not. Now, that's not the only way to adopt a foster child. There are children who are in foster care who are already, parental rights have been terminated and they're seeking placement. I would say that those are the exception and not the norm, but certainly not atypical. But when you adopt through a private agency, I've only worked with private agencies for newborn adoptions, and so private agencies are matching families with birth parents who are going to be having a child, and then consents are signed right at or around the time of birth, and then children are placed immediately, usually from the hospital, but not always, but usually from the hospital directly into private care or into private placement for adoption. Those folks need to go through home studies and have all of their background checks done, but they're not in that CHINS process where they're sort of waiting for a child to become eligible for adoption. I'm sure that there are some private adoption places that place older children. I just have never had any experience working with agencies that do that. All agencies with whom I've ever worked have only been newborn placements. And so those processes just look completely different. There's also a very significant difference in cost. Foster to adopt often is state subsidized. And so if you adopt a child out of the foster care, there are usually subsidies that are available to help with attorney's expenses and also per diems. after children are placed to help offset some of the costs of maybe some special needs that might exist, or just to try to help the family have enough resources to meet needs. Whereas private adoptions, often you're paying to match, you're paying for for private adoptions with an agency where there's matching to start someplace at $25,000 to $30,000 and then go up from there. Whereas foster to adopt, generally you will be reimbursed the amount of $1,500 per child, and that will cover the cost of the adoption. So there are emotional considerations that need to be made, there are practical considerations that need to be made, but they are fundamentally different paths to adoption.
And I know, based on just experience, my wife's Romanian, and Romania used to have a very robust adoption. They've closed their borders for adoption now, unless you are Romanian. But I think the experience of one person, one guy bringing over 20 Korean babies isn't the experience anymore. So there's a lot more requirements if you're doing international adoption to go over to the country, right? I mean, it's a lot more robust of an experience than it was 20 or 30 years ago, correct?
Absolutely.
Here's some more questions we have coming in. Thank you so much, by the way, for sending these questions. These are great questions. There's not a bad question, and if they are, I won't ask it. But 219-690-8057. What is the process to determine whether a family is adequate for adopting a child? I have a very close friend with a horrific adoption story. What do they do to make sure that a child or that a family is acceptable for that child?
So the legal answer is that you have to go through if you're going to go through a private adoption, you have to be approved by a licensed child placing agency who does criminal background checks, will come to your home and do a home study, will do a questionnaire, maybe talk to some collateral resources, and then make a determination about whether or not you're suited. Now, there are certain things that are preclusive. If you have certain criminal histories or other problems that are immediate red flags, you may be barred forever from adopting, or depending on the crime, depending how long ago the offense occurred, may also be a relevant consideration. And they have to be done through a licensed child placing agency, so that agency is licensed by the state, and their caseworkers are trained on how to do that. If you're adopting through the foster system, the Department of Child Services facilitates that role. They do the background checks, they're doing the home studies. That's the legal answer. The reality, though, is there is not a perfect test to say, is this family right for this child, or is this family really perfectly suited to be parents? There's no background check or home study or questionnaire that is ever going to ensure that with absolute certainty. And so are there cases where people perhaps are not the best equipped to adopt children? Probably. Are there cases where people are not the best equipped to biologically have children? Probably. And so the system is set up when children are being adopted to try to ensure that there is kind of a minimum level of oversight to make sure that the home will be appropriate. But just like anything, there's no absolute guarantee.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, please do.
On that note, during this whole thing of meeting my biological mom, I did have some mild kickback from that, to where, again, the upholster, my teacher, her daughter eventually came up, messaged me and said, hey, I really wish you'd call me. I'd like to tell you a little bit about your parents.
I'm sorry, Betsy, real quick. How did they know your parents? Just from the
same church. It was
okay,
my
just same church. Okay.
Church and school were the
I
same.
got you. Okay.
Same thing. So, and I have not followed up with her, but she was very insistent that she had witnessed things. She's like, I don't think they were really suited to be parents, the way they would talk to you and all that. And I never really followed up on that, because I didn't want to go down that path. I wanted to remember my memories, the ones that I do have, the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to know that. I don't know. I just don't think I would want to know. But that has come up, to be like, well, were they really suited to be parents?
Sure. I think it's a question that, again, for those of us that have friends or family members or people we know that didn't have the best experience in adoption, it's a natural question to say, is the system set well for pairing? It seems like, you guys got paired with a great family, and families that wanted you, and families that embraced you and included you. Maybe not everyone, based on this text, not everyone has had that experience. So, another question, a question for Christina. I've heard of people using DNA companies like 23andMe to find their biological parents. What other tools are there for people seeking info on finding biological parents? And I will add this question because it's similar from a different phone number. You guys are operating on the same wavelength here. How will things like Ancestry DNA, 23andMe affect the future of adoptions? How will closed adoptions take place? How is the law changing to adapt to this testing with DNA? So kind of all that DNA stuff in there.
Well, I will do my very best. So let's start with the law is a slow animal, and so we don't really see a lot of change happening with the law, particularly as it relates to these kinds of questions. I mean, the statutes are not really designed to address if you will find your birth parents or how that will work. That is usually information that's negotiated at the agency and happens outside of the legal adoption process. But I will say that in Indiana, to my knowledge, there is a registry that exists so that adopted children can put their name on a registry, and then birth parents can put their name on a different registry, and that the Indiana State Department of Health, provided that the match would be made, can facilitate that regardless of whether it was an open adoption, a closed adoption. It is an option that exists. I would say that for people who went through private agencies, there are probably some resources and tools available through the private agencies to get more information, because in many cases birth parents may say to the agency, if John comes to you when he's 18 and wants to know about me, you do have my permission to share my information, or you do not. And so there may be some mechanism available through the private agency that could create an opportunity for connection. I don't know anything about the DNA&Me or Ancestry, I think you would still need to have a starting place to start that conversation, and I think that would be with a private agency. For a lot of people that were adopted from my generation with a closed adoption, there's nowhere to go. I mean, like my agency doesn't exist anymore. It was DCS, but then there was a subgroup that worked with them. That entity is gone. I don't believe that there's probably any real way for me to track that. I do think that more and more agencies, because they do keep contact information, could serve as a mechanism to create a connection if people really wanted to do that. But again, it would depend on the particular agency and what authority they were given from birth parents and adoptive families at the time that the adoption was arranged.
Certainly, with all the DNA research and all the DNA companies, I'm sure there'll be, it could also lead to people being able to connect with other people, easier if they want to, but I'm sure that'll be an ongoing conversation. Andrea, this one is for you. How did your adopted parents treat your Korean culture?
We went to a Korean festival one time when I grew up in a really rural part of Pennsylvania, and so I think even if my parents had wanted to, there just weren't a lot of opportunities. Again, I think it was helpful for me to be around children who were from other countries. Through the playgroups that our adoption agency, when they connected our families, it was helpful for me to see some other children, I think, that were not white, because my community was very, very white. But there just weren't a lot of options, and so I would say that there's probably more of me being that country rural background than having any connection really to being Asian and or Korean. And I joke about this, but sometimes too, when you grow up in a certain environment, and this wasn't like this is going to sound really terrible. Sometimes
I've said worse. Go ahead.
Especially growing up, but a lot of times I will forget that I'm Korean. So I have gone into restaurants before, this sounds terrible, my husband and I, like several years ago, we walked into a Japanese restaurant in New York, and I looked at him and I said, "Oh, this must be really good. We're the only white people in here." and he looks at me and he goes, "Well, I'm the only white person in here." But it's more, that was my environment. And so it's actually weird for me as an adult when I moved away from my family to meet people that don't know that about me and don't know that about my family. And sometimes when my parents come to visit, if my husband and I go out to eat dinner with them, people just automatically assume that
your
he's
in-laws,
there.
right?
Yes, that they're my in-laws. And so anyways, that's a little strange for me, but I don't even know how I got down this
No,
road. Sorry.
it's great though, because it's really interesting to hear. So you do feel very connected to a white culture because you were born into a white culture in a predominantly white community in a very white state, right? I mean, so it's one of those things where it's interesting to hear that. So have you done anything as an adult to reconnect to your Korean culture, or no? Or it's okay if you didn't. You don't feel bad, like, no, I'm a terrible Korean.
No, not really. And I would say, I joke that I'm not easily offended, but really I've had some of the stranger things have been said to me as an adult. Again, I think because people lack that history about me, that, I really didn't have, I don't know, maybe I did and I pushed them out of my mind, but I really didn't have, beyond like the normal teasing that you get as a child, I didn't really have that. And so it's more as an adult being out of that environment that I've had some like stranger things said to me where I've had to like, what?
Yeah.
Can I
Absolutely.
ask you a question? Do you have Korean people come up to you speaking Korean? Because I get it because I was also my parents were white, but I'm Hispanic.
Okay, yep.
And I will constantly get people coming up to me trying to speak Spanish to me.
And your
And
Spanish
I'd be
isn't
like,
great.
I have no idea. All I get is what I have from a restaurant industry.
Yeah.
I get that all the time. And actually, it happened a few times when I was a kid, which was really, it was kind of off-putting to me. It happened a few times at different Chinese restaurants. And so I avoided them for several years because I felt so uncomfortable as a kid. But no, I get that all the time, or I have people that tell me that they really like to go to certain Korean restaurants. And I mean, but it's always people trying to make a connection with me, so I don't get offended. In some weird ways, I find it kind of, it's strange, but again, I feel like it's just people trying to make conversation with me most of the time.
There's an endearing element to it in a sense.
Yeah, a little bit, or at least I like to think that. And but yes, all the time. And actually, we were, my husband and I went to Japan several years ago for vacation, and we were both handed brochures at one of the museums. And I was like, Mickey, I can't read mine. And he goes, I can read mine just fine. So they handed him an English one, and then I have no idea what language they handed to me. So, but yes, I get that all the time.
All right, if you have a question, 219-690-8057. Now, I want to be sensitive with this question, Betsy, but in your biography, you talk about that you've also given a child to adoption as well. Did you being adopted impact your desire to want to use the adoption process?
Well, they were adopted through sort of a different means. It was because he was placed in their care under a guardianship. Me and his father were married, I don't even know, like a month. And we ended up not being together anymore. There was really no, I was so new to Indiana, they were not willing to give me any welfare assistance or cash assistance because I had no work history in Indiana. So there was really no means for me to take care of him. So I gave him to his grandparents, the paternal grandparents. After that, I guess I sort of just became sort of selfish, I guess, and went out and did my own thing. And then it came up in the paperwork that they were going to try to adopt him. I did contest it to try and get him back, but the judge ruled in their favor to let the adoption go through because he'd become acclimated to the environment. So, repeat the question again?
No, it's fine. Just, did your experience being adopted impact your experience then, or how did it impact your experience of your child? It sounds like your child has had a very different experience in the adoption process than you did then.
Yes, and during that time, the judge did ask. I was hoping of a different outcome, but the judge did ask them, would you like him to her to eventually have contact with him? And they said no.
Okay.
So now he's over 18, and I think I'm sort of in a position like how my mom was, where like you're nervous about it and you don't really know. Do they want to see me? You know, do I want to introduce myself into their lives? Do they really want that portion of their life back? So,
did that impact how you view your biological mother then? Having went through the process as well, I mean, to be more compassionate or to be more, understanding of your own biological mother in that process?
I do the fact it was hard. That whole process was hard, have, like you talked about, the people coming to your house to see where your home environment is like, and, doing background checks and looking at you, and you're under a microscope.
Yeah.
And I feel for her, my biological mom, a lot because it was not, I'm sure, easy for her. They did, she said that the nurses did give me to her, so she was able to hold me for a while and spend time with me, and she's like, I don't really think they were supposed to do that. But it was a difficult process for her, and now I can see how that was difficult, and because it was difficult for me, it was obviously difficult for her as well.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Here's a question we received here. As someone who is adopted, I assume this is for you, Christina. As someone who is adopted, do you feel strongly, or I guess for anybody really, as someone who is adopted, do you feel strongly about adopting a child yourself? Now, Christina, you have adopted a child. Do either two of you feel strongly about the adoption process as well? But I'll let you start, Christina.
So we, my husband and I had my first son, Evan, biologically, and we had originally thought we were going to have difficulty having children. So even before we got married, we had conversations about adoption. I don't know if that's necessarily because I was adopted or just because I thought it was going to be a challenge. And then we had Evan, and it was wonderful. And we thought, okay, well then we won't adopt because we don't want to take a child from another family who otherwise could not conceive, because we've had this blessing in having this child. And then we tried for 5 years unsuccessfully to get pregnant and had multiple doctors tell us that we were not going to get pregnant. And so then we decided to start our adoption journey, which has led us to adopting Emmett. I will say probably coming to that decision was very easy for us, but I think that it was because our marriage, when we started, we had kind of a foundation of adoption was just as fine a choice to grow our family as having a child biologically. And so then we adopted our Emmett, and so there's a 7-year age gap between our Evan and our Emmett. And then a hot minute later, we got pregnant with Elliot. So, it was great. And, I was actually speaking with some folks at my table, Carolyn and Earl, and I was telling them that, they always say God doesn't give you anything more than you can handle. And having Elliot certainly solidified that for us, because we had Emmett, who had a whole host of special needs during his first several years of his life. And we were spending a lot of times at hospitals and figuring out how we were going to get care for Evan. And then it was, oh my gosh, pregnant again. And so really for us, having a child biologically or adopting a child to grow our family felt the same. It felt the same in terms of the decision-making process. I do remember when Emmett was born. So we were matched with Emmett's birth parents very quickly, and she went into labor early. He was born at 32 weeks with Down syndrome. They thought he was going to weigh about 2.5 pounds. I mean, it was very quick thing. And so we drove down to Indianapolis because that's where he was being born. We got there on a Saturday. They said, birth parents would really like to have the experience of having him together, but they want you here to hold him as soon as he's born so that he can meet you. And so we thought it was going to be a while. So we went to dinner, and then we went to a movie, and we were like 2 minutes into the movie, and the phone rang, and everyone's very frustrated because our cell phone is ringing in the middle of, it was Cinderella. And
I was going to say, what movie was it?
Okay, it was Cinderella. And so we were really 2 minutes in, and so we rushed back to the hospital to hold him. And I remember thinking, I knew Evan from the second that he came into being. I mean, he grew within me, and I felt bonded with him. And I remember thinking, is it going to be different? Like, am I going to meet Emmett, and I'm not going to have this sort of moment where there's just this instantaneous bond, the way that it was when they gave me Evan for the first time? And I will say that when I met Emmett for the first time, first of all, I was, other than the nurses and the doctor, the first person who held him because the birth mom had made that choice. And she thought it was important that I be the one, and my husband be the one who would hold him first. And I will say that for me, that moment of, I am so in love with you in your mind, didn't really happen until the birth parents had signed the consents, because there was a part of me that just was so afraid that it was going to get taken away. And birth mom was there. She was in the hospital still. She was coming to see him. He was in the hospital for a while. She was coming to see him in the hospital. And so until they had signed that paper and I realized that nobody was going to take him away from me, there was sort of some reluctance in that relationship. But I also remember, as soon as we realized that he was ours, just that same feeling of just joy and blessing, and that we had with our biological child, and then again with Elliot when he was born. And so I just think that it was just as natural a choice to us as anything else, but the experience of him coming into our family was maybe slightly different.
And so you could speak to this because you have biological children and you have one adopted son. And so if there's somebody in here that's adopted or somebody that's listening and adopted, you could speak to this, having both biological. For you, is there anything different?
Well, all of my kids are different, and so that's always a challenge. We get that a lot, and so maybe because I am an adopted child, I have never been someone who's like, oh, look, that little boy looks just like his mom, or that little boy looks just like his dad. I don't really have a lot of that in me. When people talk about sort of, oh, I'm so interested in my genealogy, I can understand intellectually why that's interesting, but it's not anything that I've really felt terribly passionately about. In fact, I self-identify as Lebanese. So, I mean, for whatever that's worth, and Italian. So in any event. But nobody ever tries to speak different languages to me, so that has never happened. So all of my kids are different in their own ways, but because I've never been someone who has been so interested in lineage or so interested in, oh, look, he has his eyes or her hair or whatever, I don't really think there's that big of a difference. I think for us, because Emmett has relatively profound special needs, he's just a really special human being, and so he stands out in that way, and he draws people to him. I have accepted that my whole life I will be Emmett's mom, and that's okay. I'm also Evan's mom, and I'm also Elliot's mom, but I will always be Emmett's mom. That's how people will identify me. And so it may be difficult for me to speak to that, only because our experiences are so unique in that all of my kids are different. All of them are special in their own way. I am no less bonded to any of them because of the way that they came to us. But our relationships with each of them are different. And with Emmett particularly, because he needs us in a way that our other children will grow out of, you know? And so it's difficult for me to say what that would look like if he did not have some of those needs. I can say there is no difference in terms of the love. I mean, there's just no difference.
The difference, it seems to be more in terms of, like you said, a child with special needs compared to two children that aren't, right? Which would be probably a shared experience with families that have children with special needs, right? And oftentimes children with special needs they don't need more love. They need different things from their parents,
Right.
correct?
And I will also say that when I look at my kids' relationships with one another, there's no difference.
Yeah.
I mean, if anything, Elliot, who's even younger than Emmett, you see this very strong protective mechanism in him. We've seen it in Evan from the day that Emmett came home. And so as siblings, there is no distinction. We talk about it openly. We're frank. It's just, it's never really affected their relationships with one another. Emmett looks different than we do anyway, although he's also Lebanese, so there's that. And so, you know, it all comes around. But my dad always says, yeah, that's because he was always mine. And so, you know, I do always say though, so his birth parents were both Lebanese, dark skin, dark eyes, obviously not what I've got going on, and that's okay. But he has these gigantic, gorgeous blue eyes, and I have no idea where they came from. And so, you know, it's just he looks. We're just a family, you know. That's it. We're just a family.
And that's a beautiful sentiment. Families look different, right? And there's no right or wrong family. There's no real or family. Family is what a family manifests itself as, and so that's a beautiful thing. Now we like to end every episode with this question, and I'll give you a couple minutes to think about this while I end the episode. But think about this question: what gives you hope? One of the things we like to do is engage, despair, engage just all the kind of cultural chaos that happens with hope. And so maybe it's your family, maybe it's whatever it can be. There's no wrong answer, but I'll ask each of you individually what brings you hope. But I want to talk to you real quick. I want to thank you so much for being here. When we talked about doing a discussion over dinner before the end of the year, obviously there's all these other kind of decisions right now that you have to make. Is it safe? Is it, are we going to have anybody here because of COVID-19? And we decided let's just do it. Let's see what happens. And we're thrilled with the turnout tonight. And you get to hear the varied experiences of 3 different women who have been adopted. They're adoptees. One who has adopted a child as well, and one who has had one of her children adopted. I think if I've taken anything away from tonight, and that I've learned, and I hope you've learned something, is that all of our families look different, and that's okay. It's okay to if you have adopted children in your family and this doesn't, and you look different racially than your parents, or you've got a different, identifies different, gender or whatever. Families look different. What matters, though, is how we choose to embrace, include, and love those who are biologically or otherwise connected to us. And so my hope for you is that whether you have a biological family or not, that you feel familial bonds with people who love you deeply, and that you get to reciprocate that love deeply with other people as well. Because I can tell you this, there's lots of problems in this world, right? There's all kinds of things that we can point out. But there's nothing like the bonds that you can have with people that you consider your family. And so I'm going to end the episode by asking this question, and I'll start first with Andrea. What brings you hope?
Well, I would say that, I think these past several years, there's just been a lot of division. And so I think conversations like this help to bring light to the fact that there's so much more that we have in common and so much more that can bring us together. And so I find a lot of hope in that, and I think that conversations like this are so important, because I think a lot of us, me, I'm guilty of this, but I definitely think our country especially, we've forgotten how to talk to each other. We're very reactionary, and we want to get upset about a lot of things. And again, I'm not easily offended, but I oftentimes think that sometimes things that people say to me, it's because I like to think that it's because they're trying to make a connection with me. And I think a lot of us do that. And so anyways, I have a lot of hope that there are things and that conversations like this that, that's going to bring us together.
Absolutely. Christina, what brings you hope?
I mean, I guess, and I know this is probably what a lot of people say, but I feel a lot of hope when I look at my kids. I feel a lot of hope when I look at my kids' friends relating with each other, and I see just profound kindness and joy and laughter, and it reminds me that through all the hard things and the difficult things, we just have these beautiful gifts in these children who are going to take the messages that we instill in them and hopefully move things forward in a positive way. And I know I have spoken a lot about my kiddo with special needs tonight. I had not intended that necessarily, but I look at the way that the world relates to him, and I look at how much joy he brings to people, not intentionally, just because he is a joyful person. And I see the just kindness and acceptance of difference in a way that I think probably didn't exist decades ago. I see the way that my 13-year-old son's friends relate to our family dynamic. I see the way that Elliot doesn't even really understand a difference. And it makes me optimistic. It makes me hopeful for the future. And so there's just so much joy and goodness that happens in such an intimate, private sort of setting and space. And so really it's just my kids.
Okay, absolutely. Betsy, what brings you hope?
Well, since 2020, we've seen everything in different light, or not seeing our family, or not seeing our friends, definitely took its toll on us. So just even how tonight, just being able to sit in a room full of people and talk to each other and break bread together, and Steve and two people, I'm like, oh, and we just have a conversation. And so that in general is a wonderful, optimistic thing, and hopeful for our future going forward, because we've had this time to realize what was without, if we didn't get to do anything like that. So I think definitely family and spending time together, loving one another, understanding one another, being patient with one another, all bring hope in general. So.
Absolutely. Well, Betsy, Christina, Angela, you guys bring me hope, and I want to thank them for being here. Will you please give a round of applause for our panelists tonight? And again, thank you. I want to thank our team that prepared dinner. Please give a round of applause for Joel Crane for all that he did, and Pastor Becky, and our tech team in the back. Jason and Becky are in the back, and everyone serving and volunteering that'll take down this thing, get ready for Sunday. Hey, thank you so much. If you haven't liked us on Facebook yet, that's how you can best kind of keep up with the events that we're going to do. I'm sure we'll have one after the first of the year again on a different topic. If you've got ideas for topics, let us know. But hey, be good to yourself and be good to others, and have a great night. Thanks for coming. Thank you so much.